Tear that fence down! All of it! I'm not asking again!
That's what the HOA president screamed at two workers while they ripped apart the cedar posts my father set in 1978. I drove up from the North Pasture and found a $120,000 swimming pool sitting in the middle of my cattle land. Blue mosaic tile, stainless steel ladder, filtration system humming away like it belonged there. She'd torn out 200 feet of livestock fencing, poured a concrete pool on my grazing pasture, and thrown a grand opening party, all while I was 5 miles away checking on my herd. The chlorine stung my nostrils before I even killed the engine. She stood there in her white Escalade, arms crossed, smiling like she'd just done me a favor. She had no idea I'm a licensed land surveyor. Every inch of that pasture is recorded in my name. I didn't call the sheriff. I called a plumber. Tell me, what would you do? I need to take you back a bit so you understand what she walked into. My name doesn't matter, but the land does. 640 acres of West Texas cattle country, halfway between Midland and the middle of nowhere. My grandfather bought it in 1968 with cash from 20 years of pipeline work. My father ran Herefords on it his whole life, and when he got sick, ALS, the kind that takes everything slow, I left my job as a licensed surveyor for the city of Odessa and came home to keep the place running. Dad passed in the spring of 2020, quietly. The way he did everything. He left me the herd, the house, and a tin box under his workbench with every original deed, survey plat, and boundary record going back to the day his father signed the papers. I kept that box like scripture. The house isn't much. 1 story, limestone foundation, tin roof that sings when the wind hits right, a horse barn with a leaning door, a hay shed that smells like dust and alfalfa no matter how many times you sweep it, and fences, miles of cedar post and barbed wire my father strung himself, most of it still holding after 40-some years. I ran 200 head of crossbred cattle on that land, alone, every morning, started at 4:30. Coffee in a tin cup, boots on the porch, truck idling in the dark. You learn to love the quiet out here, the creak of the gate hinge, the low hum of the windmill pulling water, the way the sky turns copper right before sunrise. Then Ridgeline Estates showed up. In 2019, a developer named Trent Kincaid bought the old Crawford Ranch next door and carved it into 87 half-acre lots. Cookie-cutter houses with stone facades, 3-car garages, and HOA fees that could feed a calf for a month. The kind of neighborhood where people move to the country and immediately start complaining about the smell of it. His wife was Shelby Kincaid, blonde, heavy-set. Never once saw her without a linen blazer, oversized sunglasses, and a clipboard. She drove a white Cadillac Escalade and parked it like she was docking a yacht. The IOA made her president on day 1, and 7 years later, she still acted like the title came with a badge and a gun. The first letter arrived 6 months after the last house sold. It was printed on Ridgeline Estates' HOA letterhead, which she designed herself, and it informed me that my cattle fencing was visually inconsistent with community standards and needed to be painted or replaced within 30 days. I read it twice, then folded it into my back pocket and went to check the south water tank. A week later, she showed up in person, parked the Escalade right at my gate, stepped out in white sneakers that had never touched dirt, and told me my fence looked like it belonged in a junkyard, her exact words. Standing on the gravel shoulder of a county road that's been there since before she was born, I leaned on the gatepost, the rust rough under my palm, and said the only thing that needed saying. "Ma'am, your HOA ends at that survey pin right there. My fence is on my land." She tilted her sunglasses down and looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that isn't a smile at all, and said, "Everything in sight of Ridgeline is my concern, Mr. Holt." That was the first time she said my name. It wouldn't be the last, but standing there in the morning heat, with the smell of mesquite and engine oil drifting off the road, I had no idea how far she was willing to go, and I had no idea that the survey pin she'd just dismissed was the same one her husband would try to move 6 months later. It started with 5 days away from the south pasture. I'd been moving cattle to the north section for summer grazing. 200 head don't relocate themselves, so I spent most of a week on horseback, mending fence, checking water troughs, and sleeping in the line cabin my grandfather built from railroad ties and corrugated steel. No cell service up there, no neighbors, just wind, cattle, and coyotes arguing after dark. On the fifth morning, my phone buzzed the second I hit the ridge where the signal picks up. It was Emmett Dawes, 67 years old, rancher 3 miles east, and the only man alive who still remembered helping my father pour the original corner posts. Emmett didn't call often. When he did, it mattered. "Garrison, you better come look at your south pasture, and I mean right now." I drove the 12 miles in under 15 minutes, dust boiling behind the truck the whole way. When I crested the last rise and looked down at the south field, I pulled onto the shoulder and just sat there. 200 feet of my livestock fencing was gone. Not fallen, not broken, gone. The cedar posts had been pulled out of the ground, the barbed wire rolled up and dragged off site. And sitting right there in the middle of my grazing pasture, where 40 head of cattle had been eating coastal Bermuda 3 weeks earlier, was a swimming pool. Not a kiddie pool, not a stock tank someone painted blue. A full-size, in-ground, competition-grade swimming pool, concrete shell, blue mosaic tile lining, stainless steel handrails, a 3-stage filtration system bolted to a concrete equipment pad, and a brand-new wrought iron fence around the whole thing, painted bright white, with a gate that had a keypad lock. The chlorine hit me before I even got out of the truck, that sharp chemical tang cutting straight through the smell of dry grass and cow manure. It was like walking into a resort lobby in the middle of a hay field. I stood at the edge of what used to be my fence line and stared. The pool deck was poured right over the root system of a mesquite tree my father had trimmed every spring for 30 years. They'd cut it down. The stump was still there, poking through the fresh concrete like a headstone. That's when Shelby Kincaid pulled up in the Escalade. She stepped out holding a clipboard and a Starbucks cup, her sunglasses pushed up on her forehead like a tiara. She walked toward me with the confidence of a woman who had never once been told she was wrong. "Surprise!" She spread her arms wide. "You should be thanking me, Mr. Holt. I just added $50,000 to your property value." I didn't blink. "Who gave you permission to build on my land?" She laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, honey, that's not your land. The HOA boundary extends well past that old fence line. We checked." "Checked with who?" "With the HOA surveyor. My husband arranged it." I looked at the pool. I looked at the stump of my father's mesquite tree. I looked at the 200-foot gap where my fence used to be, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not rage, not panic. Clarity. The kind you only get when someone has made a mistake so enormous that the consequences are already built into it. Because I didn't need to check with anyone. I am a licensed surveyor. I'd walked this boundary with a GPS unit 3 years ago. I knew the exact coordinates of every corner pin, every setback line, and every legal description attached to this parcel. That pool wasn't close to the boundary. It was 47 feet inside my land. But I didn't tell her that. Not yet. I nodded slowly, walked back to my truck, and pulled my camera off the passenger seat. I photographed the pool from every angle. I photographed the missing fence. I photographed the mesquite stump. And I photographed Shelby Kincaid standing next to a $120,000 structure she had just built on someone else's property. She watched me with her arms crossed and that same plastic smile. "Are you done playing detective?" "Just getting started, ma'am." I drove home, sat down at my father's desk, and opened the tin box. The letter arrived 3 days later. Ridgeline Estates HOA letterhead. The same heavy cream paper. The same gold seal she'd probably ordered from a trophy shop. This one was different. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a demand. The HOA was ordering me to remove all remaining livestock fencing within 500 feet of the new community pool because it posed a direct safety hazard to minor children. Attached was something called the Ridgeline Environmental and Safety Standards Policy, 14 pages of rules she'd clearly written herself, citing authority she didn't have over land she didn't own. I set the letter on the kitchen table next to my coffee and read the whole thing, every page. Then I put it in a manila folder, wrote the date on the tab, and filed it with the first letter. Evidence has a way of becoming useful when people forget what they've put in writing. I didn't respond. That was deliberate. In my experience, people like Shelby Kincaid don't handle silence well. Silence makes them louder, and louder makes them careless. It took her 9 days. On a Tuesday morning, a White County truck rolled down my access road, and a code enforcement officer named Dale Winslow stepped out with a clipboard and a look on his face that said he'd rather be anywhere else. He told me he'd received a complaint about unsanitary livestock conditions near a public water feature, specifically animal waste within 100 feet of a community swimming pool. I almost smiled, almost. I walked Dale down to the south pasture. We stood there together looking at the pool, gleaming blue tile, brand new filtration system, surrounded by cattle pasture. Dale looked at the pool, then he looked at me, then he looked at the pool again. "Mr. Holt, whose land is this pool on?" "Mine." He wrote something on his clipboard. "And does this pool have a building permit for this parcel?" "You'd have to ask Mrs. Kincaid about that. She's the one who built it." Dale Winslow drove back to the county office that afternoon, and what he found changed the whole picture. The building permit for the pool, permit number 2024-BP-18447, listed the construction site as Lot 14, Block 3, Ridgeline Estates. That's a half-acre residential lot on the northeast corner of the subdivision. It is not my land. My land is an agricultural tract, a completely different parcel, different tax, ID, different zoning classification. The permit had been filed under the wrong property. Whether that was an accident or something worse, Dale couldn't say officially. But when he told me about it, his eyebrows did the talking. I filed a FOIA request that same week. I wanted the full permit application, the submitted site plans, the surveyor's certification, and any correspondence between Kincaid Development and the county building department. Every piece of paper Trent Kincaid had touched. Here's the thing most people don't realize about building permits. A permit doesn't just authorize construction. It certifies that the applicant has legal authority to build on that specific piece of land. If you submit a permit application for Parcel A, but build on Parcel B, that's not a clerical error. That's fraud. And in most jurisdictions, it voids the permit entirely. Everything built under a fraudulent permit is unauthorized construction, which means code enforcement doesn't fine you and wait. They issue a stop work order and refer the case for criminal review. 2 weeks later, Dale Winslow showed up at Shelby Kincaid's front door with a violation notice. Not for me, for her. The pool was flagged as an unpermitted structure on agricultural land. She had 30 days to respond. I heard about it from Emmett, who heard about it from Dale's wife at the grocery store. Small towns run on that kind of network. Emmett called me that evening, chuckling so hard he could barely get the words out. She turned 3 shades of red, Garrison. Told Dale the whole thing was a clerical error and that her husband handled the paperwork. "That's probably true," I said. "And that's exactly the problem." I hung up, poured a glass of iced tea, and sat on the porch watching the last light drain out of the sky. Somewhere south of the house, the pool's filtration pump hummed in the dark. On my land. Running on electricity Shelby Kincaid was paying for. Filtering water I was about to find a very good use for. Shelby didn't slow down. She accelerated. Within a week of that violation notice, a letter arrived from an attorney named Brent Cosgrove, senior partner at a firm in Odessa that handled most of Trent Kincaid's development deals. The letter was a cease and desist, and it accused me of willful interference with planned community infrastructure and creating a public endangerment by maintaining livestock in proximity to a recreational facility. I read that line 3 times. Recreational facility. She'd built an illegal pool on my cattle pasture, and now her lawyer was calling it a recreational facility. On paper, it sounded serious. In practice, it was a threat from a woman who didn't understand that the land under her pool didn't belong to her. But I filed it anyway. Another page in the folder. The following Saturday, Shelby threw her grand opening. I heard the bass before I saw the crowd. A DJ had set up under a pop-up tent near the shallow end, and the thump of the speakers carried across the pasture like a second heartbeat. 2 food trucks were parked along the access road, one selling brisket tacos, the other shaved ice, and someone had strung twinkle lights across the wrought iron fence. A vinyl banner stretched between 2 poles read, "Ridgeline Community Pool, built by your HOA. Built by your HOA, on my land, with my mesquite tree cut down to pour the deck." I stood on my side of the remaining fence line, about 30 feet from the shallow end, watching 60-some residents of Ridgeline Estates swim, eat, and celebrate on my property. Kids cannonballed off the diving board. Teenagers sat on the edge with their feet in the water. Shelby stood near the DJ booth in a white sundress and wedge sandals, holding a wireless microphone. "This is what happens when your HOA fights for you," she said into the mic, her voice carrying across the field. Then she looked directly at me. Some people would rather let this land rot than see progress. A few people clapped, most just looked uncomfortable. Nobody likes being part of a speech that's aimed at someone standing 30 feet away. Emmett was beside me, leaning on a fence post, his hat pulled low. He watched the party for a long time, without saying anything. Then he shook his head. "She's throwing a party on your property, Garrison. Your daddy would have called the sheriff before the first burger hit the grill." My daddy didn't have a surveyor's license. Emmett looked at me. I could see him working through what I meant. Then he smiled, the slow, careful kind that means a man knows something good is coming and has the patience to wait for it. The party ran until sundown. I didn't leave. I stood there the whole time, not because I was angry, though I was, but because I wanted to see who came. I wanted to watch Shelby in her element, and I wanted her to get comfortable. Comfortable people make bigger mistakes. Near the end of the evening, a woman walked up to me from the parking area. Nina Caldwell, staff reporter for the Permian Basin Register. Shelby had invited her to cover the event, a puff piece about community spirit and HOA investment. Nina was polite, professional, and clearly had the instinct that something about this pool story didn't add up. "Mr. Holt, do you have any comment about the new pool?" I didn't give her a quote, but I reached into my truck and pulled out a folded document, the original 1968 survey plat showing my property boundaries, every line, every bearing, every pin location. I held it out to her. "This is the legal boundary of my land. You can see where the pool sits." She looked at it for a long time. Then she took a photo of it with her phone, thanked me, and walked back to her car without another word. I watched her taillights disappear down the county road. The DJ was packing up. The food trucks were gone. The pool lights glowed turquoise against the dark pasture. And for the first time since I found that pool on my land, I felt something close to calm. Not because the fight was over, because the evidence was building, and evidence, in my experience, doesn't need to shout. That night, I sat at my father's desk and opened the tin box. It was nothing special to look at. An old tobacco tin with a hinged lid, scratched and dented from decades in the shop. But what was inside was worth more than anything Shelby Kincaid had ever built. The original warranty deed from 1968, signed by my grandfather. 3 survey plats, one from the original purchase, one from a fence line update in 1983, and one from the boundary resurvey I did myself in 2021, and a stack of 4 Polaroid photographs my father had taken the day the surveyor set the corner pins. 4 iron rods driven into the ground at the exact coordinates of our property boundary. My father had written the GPS coordinates on the back of each photo in pencil. The man couldn't program a cell phone, but he documented his land like a federal auditor. The next morning, I loaded my survey equipment into the truck, a Trimble GPS unit, a metal detector, a measuring wheel, and a field notebook. I drove to the south boundary and started at the southeast corner pin. It was right where it should be, 4 feet from the county road, marked with an orange cap and a brass disc stamped with the original surveyor's license number. I checked the second pin, northwest corner of the south section, also in place. Then I walked to the third pin. It was gone, not buried, not overgrown, gone. I swept the metal detector across a 10-foot radius and found it, 20 feet from its original position, jammed into the soft dirt at an angle, like someone had pried it out and shoved it back into the ground without bothering to set it properly. The fourth pin was the same, moved 47 feet toward my land. Someone had pulled 2 of my boundary markers and repositioned them to make it look like my property line was farther north than it actually was. And that shift, exactly 47 feet, just happened to place the pool site on what would appear to be HOA-controlled land. I stood there in the morning heat, sweat running down my neck, staring at a tampered survey pin that represented a felony. Because in Texas, moving a property boundary marker is not a civil matter. It's criminal. Texas Penal Code. Section 32.47. Fraudulent destruction, removal, or concealment of a writing. Applied to boundary markers, it's a state jail felony. 2 years. I drove to the county clerk's office that afternoon and pulled the records. What I found made the hairs on my arms stand up. 6 months before the pool was built, Trent Kincaid had hired a private surveyor to map the boundary between Ridgeline Estates and my property. That survey was completed and paid for, but it was never filed with the county. It was never submitted as part of the building permit application. It simply disappeared. I requested a copy through a secondary record search. When I read it, I understood why Trent had buried it. His own surveyor had confirmed, in writing, with coordinates with a license stamp, that the disputed area was entirely within my parcel. The pool site belonged to me. Trent knew it. He paid for the proof. Then he hid the proof and moved the pins. I sat in my truck outside the county building with the engine off and the windows down. A hot wind pushed through the cab, carrying the smell of asphalt and cut grass from the courthouse lawn. I held the suppressed survey in one hand and my father's Polaroids in the other. Same land, same pins, same truth, 40 years apart. Shelby had the pool, Shelby had the party, Shelby had the lawyer. But I had the deed, the coordinates, the moved pins, and her husband's own survey proving all of it. The power had shifted, and she had no idea. The next call I made was to Ray Salinas. Ray was a real estate attorney out of Midland, 44 years old, quiet, sharp, and known in 3 counties for winning land disputes that bigger firms wouldn't touch. He wasn't flashy. He didn't advertise. You found Ray by asking the county clerk who you'd hire if someone tried to steal your ranch. His name came up every time. I drove to his office on a Wednesday morning, set the tin box on his desk, and laid out everything. The deed, my survey plats, the moved pins, the fraudulent permit, the suppressed survey, and photographs of the pool sitting in my pasture. Ray looked through the stack without speaking. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his jaw. Garrison, this isn't a civil dispute. This is criminal fraud. Trent Kincaid moved your boundary markers, hid a survey he paid for, filed a building permit under a false parcel number, and built a $120,000 structure on your land. You've got him on at least 3 charges. I know. You also know that pool is now legally yours. I did know, but hearing it from a licensed attorney was different. Under Texas property law, any fixture, meaning any structure permanently attached to the land, belongs to the landowner, not the person who built it. A pool poured into the ground is about as permanent as it gets. Shelby Kincaid had spent $120,000 building me a water feature. Ray and I built the strategy in that same meeting. Step 1. File a certified boundary survey with the county, establishing the legal property line beyond dispute. Step 2. File a criminal complaint with the sheriff's office regarding the moved boundary markers. Felony under Texas Penal Code 32.47. Step 3. File a formal complaint with the county building department regarding the fraudulent permit. Built on Parcel A, permitted on Parcel B. But Step 4 was mine. I called a plumber named Hank Overstreet the next morning. Hank had done work on my stock tanks before. A solid guy who welded pipe like a surgeon and didn't ask unnecessary questions. I told him what I needed. A PVC line running from the pool's recirculation system to 4 livestock watering troughs positioned along the south fence line. I also needed a carbon filtration unit inline to strip the chlorine before the water reached the troughs. Safe for cattle, legal on agricultural land, entirely within my property. Hank looked at the pool, looked at the cattle pasture, and looked back at me. You want me to turn an HOA swimming pool into a stock watering system? That's exactly what I want. He grinned so wide I could count his fillings. We worked through the night, Hank and me, and 200 feet of 2-inch PVC, 4 brass gate valves, a carbon filter housing, and enough pipe cement to glue together a small refinery. The connections were tight. The flow was gravity-fed from the pool return line, and by 3 in the morning, the system was pressurized and holding. I opened the main valve at 5 a.m. Water moved through the PVC in a low, steady rush. I could hear it inside the pipe, that smooth hydraulic whisper you learn to recognize after years of working irrigation. It traveled down the gentle slope of the south pasture, branched at 2 T-fittings, and poured into 4 galvanized steel troughs I'd positioned along the fence line. By 6, the first cows had found the water, then the second group, then the rest. 200 head of crossbred cattle lined up at gleaming steel troughs, drinking cool filtered water pumped directly from a $120,000 mosaic tile swimming pool. I sat on the top rail of the fence with my coffee and watched the sun come up over the pasture. The pool's surface rippled in the morning breeze. The filtration pump hummed, the cattle drank, and somewhere inside a white Cadillac Escalade parked 2 miles east. Shelby Kincaid was about to have the worst morning of her life. Under Texas Water Code, a landowner has absolute right to use surface water and groundwater on agricultural land. for domestic and livestock purposes. That pool was on my land, the water was in my pool, and my cattle were thirsty. Shelby found out at 7:15 the next morning. I know the exact time because I heard the Escalade before I saw it. Tires screaming on gravel, engine revving like she was chasing a fugitive. She came down the access road so fast she fishtailed at the gate, threw the vehicle into park, and was out the door before the dust settled. What she saw must have been something. 200 head of cattle spread across the south pasture, clustered around 4 steel troughs, drinking steadily. The PVC line running from the pool's equipment pad, across the grass, down the slope, and into the trough system. And the pool itself, water level down 8 inches from where it had been the day before, the mosaic tile rim exposed above the surface like a bathtub ring. I was sitting on the fence rail about 50 yards away, finishing my second cup of coffee. "What did you do?" She didn't yell it, she screamed it. The kind of scream that comes from somewhere deeper than anger, from the place where people keep the things they can't control. "Good morning, Shelby. You're stealing our water. You hooked your cow pipes into our pool. I'm calling the police right now." That's probably a good idea. She called 911. I could hear her voice from across the pasture, high and tight, telling the dispatcher that a rancher was vandalizing community property and stealing water from a public recreation facility. She said criminal 4 times. Deputy Lane Pryor arrived 20 minutes later. He stepped out of his cruiser, looked at the cattle, looked at the pool, looked at the PVC pipe, and took off his hat to scratch the back of his head. I've seen that gesture from law enforcement before. It means the situation is not what the caller described. I walked over and met him at the fence. Shelby was already there, pointing at the pipe, the troughs, the cattle, and me, in that order. "Deputy, I want this man arrested. He vandalized our pool, and he's using our water to feed his animals." Pryor looked at me. "Mr. Holt, is this your property we're standing on?" "Yes, sir." I handed him a copy of my deed and the certified survey I'd filed with the county 2 days earlier. The pool, the pipe, the troughs, and the cattle are all on my land. You can confirm the parcel number with the county clerk. Pryor read the survey. He looked at the deed. He walked to the pool, checked the equipment pad, followed the PVC line with his eyes, and came back to where we were standing. Then he pulled out his radio and called the county clerk's office to verify the parcel records. It took 3 minutes. I could hear the clerk's voice crackling through the speaker, confirming that the pool's physical location matched my agricultural tract, not Lot 14 of Ridgeline Estates. Pryor put the radio back on his belt and turned to Shelby. His face was professionally neutral, but his voice had the kind of careful flatness that cops use when they're trying not to say what they're actually thinking. "Ma'am, according to county records, this pool is situated on Mr. Holt's property. I can't cite him for using a structure on his own land." "That's impossible. My husband built that pool for the HOA. We spent $120,000. Then you might want to talk to whoever told you it was okay to build it there." Shelby stood frozen. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. For the first time since I'd met her, she had no clipboard, no letter, no policy document, no attorney's name to throw around. Just a deputy sheriff telling her, in the gentlest possible terms, that she'd built a fortune on someone else's dirt. Pryor tipped his hat to me and drove off. Shelby got back in the Escalade and sat there for a full minute without starting the engine. Then she pulled out her phone. By noon, her Facebook post was live, all caps. "Our pool is being sabotaged by a rancher who refuses to respect community standards." Within 2 hours, it had 114 comments. Most of them were on her side, but buried in the thread, one question from a resident named Craig kept surfacing like a splinter. "Wait, whose land is the pool actually on?" Nobody answered him, but everybody read it. Trent Kincaid came to my door on a Thursday evening. I hadn't met him face to face before. I knew his name from property records, from the suppressed survey, and from the building permit he'd filed under the wrong parcel. But the man himself was a first. He pulled up in a black Ram 3500, the kind with chrome everything and a bed that's never hauled a bale. He stepped out in pressed khakis and a polo shirt, like he was arriving at a country club instead of a cattle ranch. He was taller than I expected, thick through the shoulders, with the kind of confidence that comes from decades of getting what he wants. He didn't look nervous. He looked like a man making a business call. "Mr. Holt, I think we got off on the wrong foot here. Mind if we talk?" I leaned against the porch post and gestured for him to stay where he was. He did. "I'll make this simple," he said. "That piece of land where the pool sits, I'd like to buy it. We'll do a clean title transfer and you can name a fair price." "What's fair?" $40,000. That piece of land was worth 3 times that on the open market. And that was before someone poured $120,000 of pool into it. He knew it. I knew it. The offer wasn't a negotiation. It was a test to see if I was the kind of man who'd take a fast check and walk away. "No, thank you." His jaw tightened. Just a twitch, but I caught it. "Garrison, can I call you Garrison? I've been developing property in this county for 22 years. I've got relationships with every commissioner, every inspector, and every judge in the district. You don't want to turn this into a fight you can't win." "I appreciate the advice, Trent, but I've lived on this land my whole life. My father lived on it before me, and my grandfather before him. I'm not selling a 1/4 acre of it to the man who moved my boundary pins." Something shifted in his face. The polished friendliness drained away, and what was underneath was harder than I expected. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked back to his truck without another word. That was Thursday. On Sunday night, at 2:14 a.m., my security camera triggered. I'd installed 4 cameras after the pool appeared, one on the equipment pad, one on the PVC line, one covering the south fence, and one with a wide angle on the watering troughs. The motion alert woke me from a dead sleep, and I opened the feed on my phone before my feet hit the floor. 2 figures, dark clothing, one carrying bolt cutters, the other a plastic jug. They moved fast, staying low along the fence line. The first one cut through the PVC in 3 places, clean snaps that I could hear through the camera's microphone. The second poured the contents of the jug into the nearest watering trough. Then they jogged back toward the access road, where a black truck sat with its lights off. The camera captured the license plate on the last frame before they pulled away. It was Trent Kincaid's Ram 3500. I called Dr. Glenn Prescott, the large animal vet out of Crane, before sunrise. He drove out and tested the water in all 4 troughs. 2 tested positive for a commercial herbicide. Not enough to kill the cattle, but enough to make them sick. 4 head showed signs of mild toxicity by mid-morning, refusing feed, standing with their heads down, one stumbling at the trough. Glenn treated all 4. They recovered within 48 hours. But the damage was done, just not the damage Trent intended. I drove the camera footage and the lab results to Deputy Pryor's office that afternoon. Criminal mischief under Texas Penal Code, Section 28.03. Property damage, animal cruelty under Section 42.09. Criminal trespass at night. Pryor watched the footage twice, paused it on the license plate, and looked up at me. "That's Kincaid's truck." "Yes, sir." The sheriff's office opened a formal investigation that day, and 3 mornings later, Nina Caldwell published her story. Front page of the Permian Basin Register. The headline read, "HOA President's Pool Built on Rancher's Land. Boundary Fraud Alleged." The article named Shelby, quoted the county clerk, referenced the moved survey pins, and included the photograph of my 1968 plat. By nightfall, my phone rang 11 times, all from Ridgeline Estates residents. Every one of them asked the same question. If Shelby Kincaid had moved my boundary markers, had she moved theirs too? The county commissioner's court met on the first Tuesday of the month in a limestone building on the courthouse square in downtown Odessa. Normally, those meetings drew maybe 30 people, retired landowners, a couple of attorneys, and whoever was fighting a zoning change. This time, the room was standing room only. Over 200 people packed into a space built for 80. Ridgeline residents filled the back rows, arms crossed, whispering. Local ranchers lined the walls. Nina Caldwell sat in the front row, with a digital recorder on her knee and a cameraman beside her. Deputy Pryor stood near the side door with his hands on his belt, watching the crowd the way cops do when they know something's about to happen. I wore a clean shirt, pressed jeans, and my good boots, the ones I keep for funerals and court appearances. I carried a leather folder with 9 tabbed sections. Everything I'd spent the last 2 months collecting, organized in the order I planned to present it. The chairman called the meeting to order. I was on the agenda under Citizen Comments, Land Use Dispute, South Tract, Holt Property. He gave me 15 minutes. I used 12. I started with the deed. I put the 1968 warranty document on the projector screen. showed the legal description, the parcel boundaries, and the original survey. Then I overlaid my 2021 GPS survey, the one I'd completed myself, with coordinates accurate to 1/10 of a foot. The boundaries matched to the inch. Then I showed the pool, aerial photographs, ground-level photographs, construction photographs pulled from Shelby's own Facebook page where she'd posted progress updates during the build. Every image geotagged, every one of them confirming the pool sat 47 feet inside my property line. Then the pins. I put the Polaroids on the screen. My father's 1968 photographs of the boundary markers in their original positions, with GPS coordinates written on the back. Next to them, I showed my own photographs from 3 weeks ago. 2 of the 4 pins pulled and relocated 47 feet south. Same pins, same iron rods, different locations. Then the permit. I showed the building application filed by Kincaid Development, listing Lot 14, Block 3, Ridgeline Estates as the construction site, and I showed the actual location of Lot 14 on the subdivision plat, a half-acre residential lot on the northeast corner of the subdivision, nowhere near the pool. I let that sit for a moment. The room was silent. Then I showed the suppressed survey, the document Trent Kincaid had paid for, received, and hidden, because it confirmed, in the professional opinion of a licensed Texas surveyor, that the pool site belonged to me. Mrs. Kincaid's husband hired a surveyor, I said, looking at the audience but speaking clearly enough for the recorder. The surveyor told him the truth. Mr. Kincaid didn't like the truth, so he buried the report and moved the boundary markers himself. That's not a mistake. That's a felony. Shelby stood up in the middle of the room. Her voice was shaking, but she was still fighting. This is a misunderstanding. My husband's surveyor made an honest error. The boundary was ambiguous. The boundary was never ambiguous, ma'am. It was surveyed, recorded, and monumented. Your husband paid to confirm it, then he altered the evidence. The chairman asked if anyone had a response. Shelby's attorney stood up, started to speak, and then sat back down. He had nothing. You could see it in the way his hands went flat on the table. Then I played the video, the security camera footage from Sunday night. 2 men cutting my PVC lines and pouring herbicide into my watering troughs. Trent Kincaid's face was clearly visible. His license plate filled the last frame. Deputy Pryor stepped forward from the side door. He walked through the crowd without hurrying. He stopped in front of Trent Kincaid, who was sitting in the 3rd row next to Shelby, and read the arrest warrant aloud. Felony boundary fraud, criminal mischief, animal cruelty, trespass. The sound of handcuffs locking is a specific kind of metal-on-metal click, sharp, final, unmistakable. The room went dead silent. Then someone on the rancher side of the aisle started clapping, slowly. Then others joined, not a roar. Just a steady, firm applause from people who knew what it meant. Shelby collapsed into her chair, mascara running, clutching her clipboard like a life vest. The commissioners voted 4-1. The pool was to be removed within 90 days at the HOA's expense, or title to the structure would transfer permanently to me as the landowner. They asked me on the record which option I preferred. I leaned into the microphone. I'll keep it. My cattle seem to like it. The civil suit settled 4 months later. $185,000, covering fence replacement, cattle veterinary costs, lost grazing time, land damage, and legal fees. Shelby and Trent's insurance company wrote the check. Their premium went up by 400% the following quarter. Insurance companies don't like clients who commit felonies on other people's land. Trent Kincaid was indicted on 3 counts: felony boundary fraud, criminal mischief, animal cruelty. His trial was set for the spring. His attorney filed for a plea deal, but the DA wasn't in a generous mood. Not after Nina Caldwell's article made the front page of every regional paper between Midland and El Paso. Trent was looking at 2 to 10 years. He posted bail and moved to a rental in Lubbock. Shelby went with him. The HOA held an emergency election 2 weeks after the commissioners' meeting. Shelby Kincaid was removed as president by a vote of 79-4. The 4 who voted for her were her book club. The new board's first official act was to hire an independent surveyor to verify the boundary lines on every lot in Ridgeline Estates. 12 homeowners discovered discrepancies in their deeds. 12 families who might have spent years fighting a boundary they didn't know was wrong. As for the pool, it stayed right where it was. I didn't drain it. I didn't fill it in. I didn't even take down Shelby's wrought iron fence. I repainted the sign on the gate. It now reads, Holt Ranch, Livestock Watering Station. Hank Overstreet came back and upgraded the PVC system with UV-resistant pipe and a better carbon filter. The County Ag Extension Office actually called me to ask how the setup worked. Turns out, recycling treated water through carbon filtration for livestock use was efficient enough that 2 other ranchers in the county adopted similar systems for their stock tanks. Not from stolen pools, but the principle was the same. I used part of the settlement money to establish the Holt Agricultural Heritage Fund, a nonprofit providing free legal assistance to ranchers and small landowners facing encroachment from developers or HOA overreach. The first case the fund took on was a widow in Pecos County whose neighbor had moved a fence line onto her winter pasture. Same trick, different county, same result. Emmett Dawes stopped by on a Saturday afternoon about a month after everything settled. He leaned on the top rail of my fence and watched the cattle drink from the troughs. The pool glimmered in the background, turquoise tile catching the late sun. A mockingbird was going through its whole catalog on the fence post behind us. Your daddy would have loved this, Emmett said. He would have done it faster. Emmett laughed. A real laugh, the kind that shakes a man's shoulders. He pulled 2 bottles of Shinerbach from a paper bag and handed me one. We clinked the necks together and drank without saying anything else for a while. That evening, I sat on the porch and watched the sun drop behind the west pasture. The sky went copper, then violet, then that deep navy blue you only get in West Texas when the air is dry and the wind is still. I could hear the cattle settling for the night. Low sounds, comfortable sounds. The sounds of animals that have water and grass and nothing to be afraid of. I thought about my father, about the tin box, about the fact that he kept every piece of paper, every survey, every photograph. Not because he expected trouble, but because he understood that land is only yours if you can prove it. Shelby Kincaid never understood that. She thought power came from a title and a clipboard. She thought authority meant control. She thought a swimming pool could rewrite a property line. And in the end, the only thing she built was someone else's water system. If you've got an HOA nightmare of your own, drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button because the story coming next week. The HOA president didn't just cross a property line. She crossed a decorated combat veteran, and she picked the wrong 4th of July to do it.
You know what got Shelby Kincaid in the end? It wasn't the beauty. It wasn't the commissioners. It wasn't even the handcuffs on her husband's wrist. It was the paper trail she never thought to check. Garrison Howe didn't win because he got angry. He won because he stayed quiet, kept records, and let the other side keep making mistakes. Every letter she sent, he fired. Every twist he made, he documented. Every time she pushed harder, he measures the distance between her confidence and the truth, and that distance kept growing. The real lesson here is simple. Land is only yours if you can prove it. And authority is only real if it's earned. Shelby had a clipboard, a title, and a belief that volume equals power. Garrison had a tin box full of this, a surveyor's license, and the patience to wait until the truth did the work for him. If you ever deal with someone who confuses a position with a personality, drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, hit subscribe, because next time the HOA president calls a decorated combat veteran on the 4th of July, that one gets loud. I will see you there.